Many of you may know me as the MC that has been standing up here emceeing the show. I actually do have a day job. I run a small consulting firm called Gemini Hive that helps companies that have a history of production, of building games in a more product-based methodology to make the shift towards service games development. I also have a very small studio that makes games in the Ukraine. I've been making games for about 25 years. Started with Nintendo in 1989. Hype versus Real Deal was invented by this guy. If you don't know him, this is Joel Brody. He's the founder and CEO of GameZebo. He was also the guy that sort of made Yahoo Games very, very successful back in the late 80s. And he came up with this format for exploring lots of different topics, current and emerging trends in the game industry with a panel of experts, and identifying places where those experts maybe disagree or have some interesting discussion, and skipping over those things that are really boring, the ones where everybody goes down and goes, yep, I agree. I agree with him. I agree with Brian. I agree with Andrew. Each of our panelists has 2 cards. So why don't you guys hold up your cards? The check mark is to say, yes, I think this is a real opportunity, and the X is, I think that's a whole lot of hype. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be firing off some topics that are sort of hot topics in the industry right now. Some of them are a little far-fetched, and some of them are really close to our hearts. And I'm going to be asking the panelists to each vote on whether they think that topic is a real business opportunity, a genuine future investment opportunity, or whether they think it's hype, or maybe it's BS, or maybe there's just something they don't like about that part of the game industry. And the panelists are all going to vote at the same time. And then if we see that all the panelists kind of agree, then we'll probably skip over that topic. And if we see that there's some conflict to be had, then we'll dig into that a little bit more deeply. Before we actually get started, I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with Jeremy. Jeremy, give me 60 seconds about yourself.
Wow, 60 seconds.
Okay, we're done. Let's move on to Brian.
So my name is Jeremy Snook. I am from Microsoft. I handle business development for first-party publishing, so I work inside of Microsoft Studios. I'm focused predominantly on console, but I do work on Windows 8 and Windows Phone a little bit as well, and try to focus most of my time with Asia-Pacific developers.
Brian?
Yes, hi, I'm Brian O from Gameville. I've been with Gameville for about 2 years now. I'm handling business app and publishing side of business globally. It's good to be here.
Thank you, Brian. Manish?
Hi, I represent Reliance Games. We are a developer out of India and other countries, Korea and Canada, and publishing across the globe. Work very closely with Hollywood IPs to create something which Kawam is already done. So over to you.
Andrew?
My name is Andrew Shepard. I head up the studios at Kabam. We're a publisher that's pretty much better known in the West, but we're just starting to expand into Asia. About 10 live games, about 10 in development.
Thank you. So we have a pretty wide variety of people here from a wide variety of backgrounds and regions. I've actually done this presentation a couple of times. I did it once in Seattle. I did it twice in Hamburg. I'm now doing it for the first time in Asia. And what I'm hoping we'll see is that when we did this presentation, and we actually used this almost exact slide deck with a different set of panelists in Europe, we got a certain set of answers. And I'm looking forward to going back through that video and this video and seeing how these topics are interpreted maybe a little bit differently in Asia than they are in the rest of the world. So let's dive right into the very first topic. What do we think about Facebook as a game platform? Is it here to stay? Is it maybe flattening out? What if you were a new developer and you were gonna make your first game today? Would you build it on Facebook? Is Facebook a real opportunity for new game companies going forward? Or maybe should they invest somewhere else? Look at that. That's surprising, Andrew. Why don't you talk a little bit about why you feel that way?
So kind of a nuanced answer, but I think Facebook as a game platform is changing. So the traditional definition of like a web game platform is perhaps not as descriptive of where their business is going. I've been very impressed with how quickly they've adapted to mobile, and as a mobile ad platform, they're very valuable to gaming, which I think gives them inroads into doing a game platform for mobile at some point, although that's just personal conjecture. I have no insight into that. So I think Also, as an authentication service, it's a very powerful platform for Western markets, certainly. So I think, in a way, their service has been disaggregated. So it's like the really relevant aspects of their business that I think game developers have to embrace are authentication and ad traffic or ad platform. But as a game platform, it's not the traditional definition. So that's why I said the hype.
Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about why you think Facebook's awesome?
I think it's a little bit different definition as Andrew has compared to what I have. I mean, what I've witnessed in Korea is that the emergence of a social platform becoming very big game platform, like Kakao and Line. I'm pretty sure a lot of people know about that. And as I also agree with Andrew that Facebook has changed a lot very rapidly to adopt the mobile business. And as if you're a developer, if you know how to maximize the social and virality of those messaging platforms like Kakao and Line, I think you're in a good position to be a success in Facebook platform too. That's why I agree with the Facebook will be another gaming platform in mobile.
And so you specifically kind of agree with Andrew that Facebook is relevant in mobile.
Right.
How about you, Manish?
So, in my opinion, I've stopped thinking of web, honestly. To me, it's mobile first, and I'm absolutely kind of surprised and pleasantly surprised at the speed at which Facebook has moved to become a mobile platform. And that's why, to me, it's a very real opportunity. And most importantly, as I see gaming going towards completely a multiplayer where the synchronous, asynchronous, it's different. Social plugins and social graphs are going to really play a very strong role, and that's why I think it's a fantastic opportunity for any game developer to really look at Facebook, especially in the Western world. In the Eastern side, still it's kind of trying to make inroads, and KakaoTalk and Line are still very well entrenched. But I'm sure, and I've been reading and hearing a lot of people where disenchantment is seeping in with those platforms, and people are looking to Facebook also in East Asia. So I think it's a very real opportunity.
And Jeremy, do you have a controversial addition to this?
I think that everybody's raised good points so far. I don't find myself disagreeing with any of them. I think that Facebook as a whole, it used to be the big platform you had to get onto to get your game to be making money. I think that now there's as we've heard, other opportunities out there. I think that it also depends on what territory you're in. You go to Korea, you're going to be a lot more focused on Kakao, right? You want to make sure you've got if you're going to go for the social graph, go for the regionally specific and regionally appropriate social graph. So I don't see it as being the one big pile of gold that it used to be, but a play that a developer should consider.
So all four of you seem to be in agreement that Facebook Canvas is maybe not the way to go.
I
Yes,
definitely think it reflects the broader trend towards mobile and tablet. The amount of change in just consumer behavior preference away from laptops to tablet, smartphone, web consumption, game consumption is really unprecedented. We
Great.
can't get there fast enough.
Let's move on to our next topic. So free-to-play games, which aren't actually really free at all, appear to be dominating most of the top 10s in the world right now, top 100s in the world as far as top grossing goes. Is free-to-play here to stay? What do you think? No premium. Premium's dead. It's gone. We're never going to see it again.
That's a different question. You want us to vote on that one?
Sure, tell us what you think about that. You brought it up.
Well, I think that you think you've got both. You've got the people who want to play, who just want to get in. They want to have the fast experience. They don't necessarily want to buy a premium experience. But Jessica, I think, did a great job this morning talking about the premium side of the Big Fish Games. It's still a huge, huge market, whether it's the traditional premium experience or some new model. But to your point, I do think free-to-play is here to stay.
The way we look at it at Kabam, it's more of a Western metaphor, but the first major transition, I would argue, in gaming was moving from coin-op games to console, where console took what was effectively paying with quarters to play each session and made it $50, $60 for the complete experience. And I view free-to-play as just being the same type of business model change that happened before with console. So I'm really excited to see, although we're perhaps 12 hours away from learning, like what's going to happen with some of the next-gen consoles like Xbox. But I do think that there's a great opportunity for the business model to go beyond what people typically think it is today, which is traditionally Facebook games and increasingly mobile tablet games. But I think it has big implications on the way that people think about game development and game design and all that. And there's a lot of uncharted territory with traditional genres. Like first-person shooter hasn't really been solved. So I think it'll actually spur a lot of innovation in this space.
You know, one of the things that I noticed when I forget who it was up here earlier today, and sort of polled the audience and said, how many people here are working on free-to-play games? And like everybody raised their hand. And then how many people are working on premium games? And there was like one person in the audience that raised their hand, and that was very different than both in the Europe show and in the Seattle show last year, where there was a much higher percentage of the audience that was still working on premium content for one platform or another.
Yep.
Asia is to some extent sort of where free-to-play got started. I mean, I remember talking about Cartwriter 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and being stunned about what was going on and a little disbelieving, actually. So, you know, maybe that particular business model has certainly taken shape over here. What about games as services? It kind of goes hand in hand with free-to-play, but I'm talking about these games that you launch. You have to support them with content. You have to support them with ongoing feature development. That seems really expensive and hard. Is that something that developers have to learn to do, or are there alternatives?
So what's the question? There are two questions in your questions. So one is this going to stay, or does the developers have to learn? Which one you want us to
Developers have to learn. Do you have to learn free-to-play in order to be successful in today's game marketplace? Oh, the one dissenting view. Tell me a little bit about why you think that's not true.
So the question whether the game as a service is going to exist, yes, it's going to exist. Whether as a developer, do you need to have wherewithals to do that? That's something which is you as a developer may decide whether you want to go with a publisher who has all the wherewithals, all the infrastructure to take care of it, and you really focus on partnering with the right publisher to kind of make it happen, versus you really taking one game, then looking at the success and creating a live ops team and then creating a community management, marketing, all of it. Now, that's something you may not have competencies to begin with, yeah, or you may not have really right DNA to kind of do that. So that, as a developer, you may choose to partner with someone. However, that's why I asked you the question, if the game as a service is going to stay here, yes, that's the very emphatic answer, yes. As a developer, it's a choice which you can make.
Do you think players require that kind of support going forward? I mean, it seems like a level of service that hasn't existed in the game industry before.
So actually, that's the topic which I'm going to speak tomorrow. Is it, are you better off making a new game or continuing to support your existing game or make a sequel? Because these are the three options as a developer you always have. New game is a probability of success and failure, we all know, right? If something is working, it's better for you to really kind of listen to your consumers, look at data, look at analytics, and continue to keep it augmented both in terms of features and updates and releases. Your whales will like it. You can increase your ARPUs and you may increase your shelf life of a game and make yourself more profitable. Getting a success is a difficult one, we all know. You talk about many successes, but there are millions of failures behind each success, and that's the scary part of this industry. So once you've got it right, extend it, and look at where the optimal curve is going down. And it's all data-driven business. It's not just whims and fancies business.
You know, as a quick aside, can you give me a rundown of what the free-to-play games market looks like in India?
So in India, the gaming market itself is very small. And what I'm talking about is all experience of publishing games in our own games, developing, publishing in North America, Europe, Korea, Japan. India itself is a very, very nascent market, very small paid games, 80%, 85% still feature phones. Android is the next big thing which is going to happen. I think this is the right time, and that's what I was talking to him before when you asked us about conspiracy theory, was how this can be early stage, high investment, high growth market India today for Android. And Indian consumers, you can assume them to be very first time gamers who will adapt to casual kind of games, and they will get accustomed to good addictive gameplay, and hence in-app purchases will happen. So that's yet to unfold in next 12, 18 months is going to unfold. Today, India is a very, very nascent, you may call it 3 years, 4 years, 5 years back kind of market, a feature phone kind of market.
Does anybody on the panel want to disagree with his statement that a developer has the choice to ignore free-to-play because they can push those responsibilities or that knowledge off onto a publisher's plate?
We are working with number of developers. I mean, we develop at the same time publisher. We value the game as a service pretty much. But there are a lot of developers who are ready to continue to support the development. And a lot of developers at the same time start up new games after launch the other game. They kind of put us in the difficult position to talk to persuade them to continue the developments in terms of updates, contents, and patches. So I do think developer has to be ready. I don't think they have much option nowadays. So I disagree with that.
I think I think the developer has to understand how the model works, and they have to be able to speak the same language, whether it's design or business. But I do think really strong publishers can complement. Like, if I were to change hats from being on the studio side to our publishing side, like our publishing business has had a great number of partnerships, small and large, where they're able to connect with teams that think about monetization, they think about live service in a way that we do as well. And the publishing team will wrap them, whether it's with performance marketing or with what we call live operations, which is doing all the in-game servicing and promotions and merchandising, what the Asian market really established, I think, first for the world market. Or even like payments, business intelligence, customer support tickets. Not all developers need those services in-house, especially on a global basis. Like, there's some regions that you happily farm out. Like, so India is definitely a large growth opportunity for us. The publishing team is focused on helping Asian developers get into North America and Europe. And I think Gameville is doing similar things as well. Latin America is also like a really attractive opportunity. It's an accretive way to expand. Also, Asian developers are ahead of Western developers in terms of thinking about regional licenses and distribution and all of that good stuff. It has a certain number of not just legal and business implications, but also tools and technology implications that just are best built into a game when it's in development, as opposed to being retrofitted once a game is successful. And so for Asian developers, I think it's a different calculus. There's a lot of innate understanding of what's needed.
Excellent. Let's go to the next topic. Zynga, the big red dog. So there was a time in which the general consensus in the industry was that Zynga owned the top spot on Facebook, and that would never change. I distinctly remember several people coming up on stage and using that as a justification for why Facebook Canvas was no longer really an option for developers. And then along comes King.com around GDC timeframe this year, and all of a sudden Candy Crush is the top game. And obviously King.com is not Zynga, at least not yet. What do you think about Zynga? Is Zynga going to stay around, or are they going the way of the dodo? Ooh. All right, so I'm going to pose a question to the panel. If you guys were running Zynga now, how would you fix it? Anybody want to jump in and play Mark Pincus for a minute?
Retire.
Good answer. That's true.
You know, the funny thing is that was exactly the same answer that Jasper Smith gave in Hamburg. Seriously, what's wrong with Zynga? Why is they all hype now?
I don't think I'm qualified. I don't. It's too big a problem for me to even think in it.
Too big a problem.
That is part of it. I mean, they're such a big company; it's hard to change. Like, they really are massive. They also have tons of cash on the balance sheet, so there's not a strong impetus for them to change like very quickly. So, at the same time, they also, despite rumors of attrition and stuff like that, they still have some of the best people in the industry that understand free-to-play, at least in the Western market. So my answer is more over the short term than the long term. I think after a while, they'll just get forced into making broader, more sweeping changes. But they are taking some aggressive moves that I think most public companies wouldn't do. Right, real money is a business opportunity that, from what I can tell, is pretty far off, and for them to embrace whole heart, invest aggressively against that opportunity is, perhaps they're not getting as much credit as they should be. They're going to end up helping build that market in the Western, or in North America at least. And then I think they are making some traction into mobile, but they're just starting to figure it out. And it's very different than Facebook development. Earlier in the session that you provided, the way that we build mobile products is 3 to 4 times more complicated than the way Facebook games are. And that's for the exact same game. It really is different. So I think they'll figure that out, but it's going to take them a while.
I guess this tells me that for the next Hype versus Real Deal panel, I better put somebody from Zynga on here
Yes,
to answer
absolutely.
this question.
And Facebook.
So one of the things that we've been talking about for the last 3-4 years is this idea of data-driven, or at least data-informed game design. And there's been a couple of camps. Some people think that the data actually kind of kills the ability to make a fun game. Some people think that it informs the ability to make a fun game. What do you think? Is data-driven game design the same as making fun? Jeremy, you were quick to X that one out. Tell us why.
I think it's, so I heard that as being, the challenge. It was an absolute statement. Is it fun? I think that it depends on your monetization and your design team. If you've got a monetization designer who actually is a designer at heart and can understand the impact that changes have on the game experience, I think it absolutely can be fun. If you've got somebody who, and I'm just hypothetically speaking here, if you've got an MBA who's their biggest contribution to game design in the past 2 years has been they make a wicked spreadsheet, I think that's absolutely going to kill your fun on a game, and it's going to be, to your point earlier, are we just nickel and diming our free-to-play business into the ground? So I think you got to have somebody who understands game design be part of that conversation, and then it can be fun. You can have really good, educated design decisions based on what people are actually voting for with their money.
Anybody have a conflicting view to that?
The view is, I think that's absolutely pertinent point. You need to have a right balance between production, game design, and the product guys. Ultimately, at the starting, a gamer will like to have a game which he or she enjoys to play. Yeah. Either because of the greed of economy designer or because of product guy or something. If the game kind of completely goes into tangent and you're really not having a good progression and balancing, then you're going to be killing the game. However, the point which I'm trying to make is you will do enough and more testing during the game development to kind of sort those niggles and have focus groups or have your country testings and all of it. And that's where the data-driven game development is a reality. Because if you're not doing that, then the subjective calls are being taken around the table, and is not going to work today. And that's why it's a real data-driven game development is a real. However, the fun part is the basic building block of any game, and that needs to be protected. And that's what comes out in your continuous researches, which you do, whether qualitative or quantitative.
So Brian, when you guys are building games, before you launch, is it data-driven before you launch as well? I mean, at what point do you start to incorporate data into your design decisions?
I think the fun in games starts off at the beginning of the project. I mean, data-driven is important in terms of business, but in terms of providing gameplay, fun gameplay to users, data-driven is not the answer. I mean, you cannot change a very non-fun game, changing the fun game just by looking at the data, right? Or tweaking some numbers in the balance sheet, right? So we are not. I mean, to your question, we are not looking at the data when we develop a game.
So Andrew, in the early days that we started discussing this, there was a lot of talk about psychological tricks being integrated in order to drive customer behavior that wasn't necessarily good for user experience. Do you feel like that's still the case? Do you have examples of decisions being made based on the graph moving in the right way, even though you felt like the the game wasn't?
Yeah, I think it's less common, to your point. Like, definitely the market is much more sophisticated globally, and most sophisticated, I'd argue, in Asia, then probably North America, then Europe. I think companies that have tried to get by with tricks like that generally have trouble maintaining the engagement with the product, the monetization against the product. Kind of to the broader question, though, I think, and not targeted at Jeremy, but oftentimes the people that are most vocally opposed to free-to-play are people that stand to lose their job if it succeeds. So it tends to be designers that aren't very good with math, that like just go off the gut, and that is for sure going away. Like, I think the hard reality is we're going into, I think, kind of a renaissance of gaming, very similar to like renaissance of architecture, where you'll have these master designers like Brunelleschi, who built the Dome in Florence, who literally know all aspects of their trade and are passable at everything, but they hold the vision. And I see that more and more at Kabam. There has to be some person that has both the art and the science in their head who can stitch everything together. And it's super rare and it's impossible to build. You have to have the right disposition, the right experience, the right trust. But those are the designers of the future. And there are not many of them. There really aren't. I think there are a bunch of companies in Asia that have great examples of this. The more I look behind companies that say that they're just driven by gut, it's usually not. It's usually a lot of science and gut. And it's just that the appeal of a rock star designer that can just wing it is so compelling to the media that they blast it. It's generally not true.
So here's one that's near and dear to your heart, the mid-core, whatever that means. You know, my personal opinion is that the mid-core is really just hardcore game players that are attracted to the accessibility and the type of game experience that casual gamers have been enjoying for years, but with thematic and gameplay elements that are more appealing to them. Is the mid-core something that you think actually exists, or is it a figment of people's imagination? Well, now I have to start with you, Andrew, since you've made so much money in the mid-core.
Yeah, so we specialize in that category, but then it also feels like a shackle. Like, the term was designed by core developers to describe games that were not theirs, right? So in a lot of ways, it's basically like we just don't want to touch this type of game, and it's clearly a growing category. I think it just speaks to the fact that gaming is changing, and in many ways, I think it'll go back to being simply described as just gaming or core gaming at some point, and you know, with next-gen consoles, it may even accelerate faster. So I don't really love the term, but I think it does speak to the difference, and the growth in the category does speak to how much that change is happening. So that's why I'd say
I remember we used to describe casual games as everything that wasn't a AAA hardcore console title, and now we have sort of mid-core that's everything that's not casual and not a AAA hardcore console title. Brian, were you the one that held up a check mark?
Yeah.
Why was that?
I'm not, the mid-core gamer, I'm not particularly talking about the genre of games. I mean, I do believe there are, mid-core gamers exist. I mean, GameView as a company, we develop more RPG titles and sports titles that we say we target the mid-core hardcore gamers. But nowadays, if you look at the market in Korea especially, there are a lot of running games, simple puzzle games in social platform and in the store. But if you take a look at the people or users who spend money are usually the people who spend a lot of time in playing games. So the same game with running or some various casual games, the female or old women play, but they don't pay. So we like to point them out as very casual gamers, but we also see there are a lot of mid-core hardcore gamers actually exist who spend a lot of time in game and also spend money on the game.
Gotcha. I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit, so not everybody will get a chance to talk on every topic. I'm going to try to zero in on, what the core conflict or the core disagreement is, and then move on to the next topic, because we've got 20 slides to get through, and I'm only on 6. So don't be offended that I didn't call on you this time. You'll get an opportunity to talk. So there was a lot of hype around Kickstarter about a year ago, maybe not even a year ago, maybe like 6 months ago. Games like Shadowrun Online that got funded and the whole Double Fine Adventure thing. What about crowdfunding? Do you guys think that crowdfunding is going to continue to be a factor in funding independent game development? Okay, Jeremy, you have the check.
We have a check. I think that you're going to see it as a forcing function for big publishers. I think that if we look at crowdfunding as the historical, 9 out of 10 of them fail type of mentality, I think that you're going to see that it's still going to be a struggle to get somebody who's not a, insert famous game developer here who's bringing back famous IP from 20 years ago type of scenario. But I think that we're going to start seeing people who do more of the microfunding and say, I can get $25,000, or okay, let's multiply that, $250,000 for my game from crowdfunding, whether it's Kickstarter or another site, that they can then turn around and use that as a like a letter of intent style position with the publisher, like a Microsoft or somebody else. It's that they can demonstrate that they can get some level of engagement from a potential audience, and therefore the publisher is going to be more receptive to the idea than it just being, well, I'm just going to give this guy $2-3 million to make their own thing. So demonstrates a little bit of kicking in and being able to be a little bit more self-sufficient. I think that that'll be an important part.
Manish?
See, there are two things. I believe as the game expectation of consumers, game quality, everything is increasing, the investment in the gaming is going to increase considerably, and the probability of success is going to go down. So their investment increasing, probability of success going down. I think the risk of the gaming business is pretty kind of is obvious to everyone. Given that situation, it is a nice romantic idea of crowdfunding, but I don't think it's really going to take off.
So you think because of the risk involved in gaming, that ultimately people are going to get burned investing in crowdfunding projects and stop doing it because they don't see success there. Interesting. Anybody have anything to add? Nope.
Sorry?
No? All right. So one of the things that we saw last year and the year before, companies like Vuga or Zynga coming to these conferences, and their message is basically, we're hiring anyone who's a qualified person. We'll move you wherever you want. We'll pay whatever you want. Come work for us, please. Is this going to continue? Is it going to slow down? Is it going to continue? Andrew, you think it's going to keep going?
Yeah, I think it'll change. I think like our newer projects are much more complicated, 3D pipelines, not yet console level of complexity on certain dimensions, but and certainly not dev budgets, but very much a different skill set than the Facebook crowd. So I think you're going to see more and more. You're going to see a lot of hiring, but it'll be people changing their functional mix.
So as the products evolve, the skill set needed to build those products evolve. You're hiring different kinds of people.
Yeah, I mean,
You're still hiring.
for like, Jeremy's probably been in the gaming industry with me for a while. Like, we've seen basically 20 years of PC console game development basically unfold in 4 years on mobile phones. So like, it's literally like 20 like the cars in Fast 6 are like 20,000 poly count. Like, the guys that did them worked on Need for Speed. If they didn't have that experience, they wouldn't be able to do that. Like, it's a really dynamic market from a staffing standpoint.
I think also as we move to a service-based model for games, we're going to have to hire more. You're not going to be able to, like in the old school days of taking a project team and rolling them over to the next project, rolling them over to the next project. You can't do that now. You have to leave some people behind to support the game. So you got to fill those positions and get other people on board. Yeah, we can't hire fast enough at Microsoft.
Brian?
I agree with Jeremy that the actual operation will require a lot more personnel, but at the same time, you want to focus on each and every project, not to attempt many projects as much possible. So once you decide to focus on a single or two projects, then you want to maintain the team for a long time, right? So in terms of focus, then you would need much more people on your team.
So you're talking about essentially building your business and continuing sort of the growth trajectory of your business by focusing on smaller projects, but making them better and better and better, rather than trying to spread your company and add new IPs. Manish?
So I think there was a frenzy on anyone who has any experience in gaming, come and join us kind of frenzy. I think now there's far more double check. What do you bring to the table? So a case in point is you may be a great game designer, but if you don't really believe in freemium, then maybe you are not kind of fitting into the whole scheme of things. You may be a 2D artist and are not looking at a 3D kind of thing. So there is a lot of checking happening, filtering happening. So the hiring frenzy on anyone and everyone is welcome is really not the case. You really need to have right skill sets. As David mentioned, is in terms of the quality and expectation from the games are completely different. The complexity of game development is changing, and you need the right skill sets. Just staffing people on a project team is not going to help.
So just to let everybody know, when I ordered the topics in the deck, I actually tried to start with things that were kind of current things that were going on and get further and further out there as the deck went on. So I'm hoping that as we start to get into some of these later slides, there'll be some topics that have a little more uncertainty in them. How about this one? So the Kinect came out. Everybody was really excited about it for, I don't know, a month. Because that's how long. Because that's how long it took us to actually get to play the games. There are a number of companies, especially out of Israel, strangely enough, that are investing really heavily behind this kind of control, flapping your arms around to control a game. What do you think about motion control? Is this something that's going to be a major factor in game design going forward? Let's start with Microsoft.
Well, if I hold this up, I'm fired. So. No, I'm kidding. I think gross motor skills that we proved with Kinect version 1 and with PlayStation Move, I think those are becoming more and more refined. I think we're going to see much more. At least our take on it is going to be more about natural user interfaces. Getting the artificiality of buttons of UI, getting that out of the way as much as possible. So maybe we don't have the giant, like, here I'm leaning and I'm flying style control mechanic, but having much more natural. I can use hand gestures, voice recognition, eye tracking, player recognition. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are going to make it much more natural for you to interact with your devices and with your games. So I think that they're here to stay. I think that the gross stuff we saw in Generation 1 is, getting refined a lot.
So you see it more as an alternative control mechanism for a game as opposed to a primary control mechanism?
No, it could be either. I think you could use it in place of a gamepad or a controller. You could also have it be an augmented, like Mass Effect 3, where you're controlling your character with your gamepad, but you're also giving voice commands to your squad mates. I think that's a kind of a good example of how it can augment.
I enjoyed that in the Tom Clancy game that had the voice control. That was cool. Brian, what do you think?
I'm not sure about other countries, but in Korea, it is hard to find homes with console machine in their living room. At the same time, console market itself is very small in Korea. So I'm pretty sure MS or Sony are doing their homework too. But since there's no device or the console in the living room, there's no way they will find the enjoyment of playing the motion control games. At the same time, we as a developer, we're looking at also the different technologies, whether to decide if we could monetize on top of that. And I don't think there's any proof, or from the industry point of view, that the developer made a lot of money by developing motion control games. So not yet.
Of course, they probably said the same thing about smartphones 5 years ago, right?
Sure.
Yes.
So you never know.
Well, and there is also the point that there are motion control devices that are being at least considered by major TV manufacturers as OEM additions to the TV itself, which would negate the need for an additional console. But in Korea, do people play on their TVs, or are they all mobile now? I mean, that is an aspect of it. Do you guys have anything to add to the contrary view?
So I think what Jeremy said, 5 spec smartphones. I think the motion will not be played on consoles. It will be played on a simple television which is already in your house, and your smartphone will have some kind of interaction with your device, with your TV, which will allow it to happen. So affordability issue of console is not going to be a deterrent for these kind of things to happen. Second is, we spoke about earlier in the discussion about the casual gamers. That's the large volume. That volume base is inside home, that they have the TV, television already there, and they will enjoy playing very simple games through motion by a phone which is already in their hand. So that's what I envisage really happening, where you can have a PS3 or a Xbox kind of experience happening through your smartphone and a TV combination. And that can really happen because OEMs are controlling the ecosystem. Samsung has a phone and a TV, and Apple will have a TV and a phone. Windows, I'm not sure about. They will do it whenever they want to do it. But since I have the large device and I have a device in hand and I control both, it's much easier for me to offer this kind of experience to the consumer. And I think that will bring a real individual experience as well as playing it together in my living room.
I actually have that as another slide, so I know what your opinion is on that one. Andrew, anything to add? No? Okay. I actually did see some demos for eye tracking devices at GDC as an augmentation for existing gameplay controls, like a third axis of control where you could actually make some really interesting stuff happen based on where the player was looking. So I tend to agree with you that jumping around in your living room might not be the way that it's going to go, but that natural motion and the ability to see, sort of to incorporate what the player is doing into the gameplay experience could be a really interesting axis of game design. So some people think publishing is dead. I know that Brian doesn't think publishing is dead. What do the rest of you think? Is publishing dead?
So An's question is publishing dead, right?
Is publishing dead? You think publishing's alive if you held up an X. So what's happening in publishing? Why are big publishers failing? And why is there this attitude that publishing is dead? Tell me why you think publishing is still a valid endeavor.
I think talking to points we've had on the panel so far of partnering, if you're trying to be a service-based game, but it's not in your strong suit, you're going to need some help doing it. Likewise, usability, research, marketing, and you can fill in the blank. There's always going to be, I hope, my kids hope, that there'll always be a need for a publisher in the game space, because there's certain things you just can't do with a 5-man shop.
Well, it's certainly something that somebody brought up earlier today, that developers need money to do what they're doing, and there's always a question of how that money's going to happen, especially if VCs suck, which I think was something that somebody postulated earlier today. Let's move on, since you all agree on this anyway. What about cloud gaming? There was a couple of big wins. There were a couple of spectacular failures. Is there value in cloud gaming to the gaming industry? Andrew?
I think digital distribution hasn't seen the full extent of how it should play out. So in my belief, that has to happen before cloud happens. Like, if you just look at the business model for cloud, it takes what's essentially a one-time cost and makes it ongoing variable cost, because you always have to stream the game service. So on an economic basis, there's not a strong rationale for it until distribution costs fall substantially. So if you took one of our products, like Kingdoms of Camelot, 3.5 years old, still flat to growing as like a 3.5-year-old product, so it looks like an MMO. We have people, although the game's very simple, they play 6 days a week still, like 3 hours a day. doing that on a streaming basis would destroy the business model. It wouldn't work. And that's with a game that actually has a lot of image compression capabilities, like content delivery compression capabilities. If you then throw that into a first-person shooter where you're streaming like tons of different graphics all the time, the infrastructure of the world, the cost structure of that infrastructure isn't there yet. So for me, it's not the near-term opportunity. The near-term opportunity is doing digital distribution for everything with like digital licenses, the whole nine. Like that's the next step, and then beyond that, I think cloud.
Manish, where does cloud fit?
So, in my opinion, a lot of server-side things which will make your game go viral, will create engagement, will really enable, will be driven through cloud gaming. For example, what we are integrating in our game is a complete multiplayer facility, which can only happen if there is a complete cloud in server and client basis interaction happening. If I want to really use or take advantage of social leaderboards, if I want to take advantages of your interactions, exchanges, challenges, those are the things which we have understood that increase your engagement in the game, just playing against AI or playing against yourself. Those are things where the server needs to be really, really embraced, and that can only happen if you're really using cloud. Second aspect, which I believe is important, is in terms of the whole game balancing and progression. As the economy design really kind of changes, your ability to not push everything on the client bus, but to have it on server and be able to tweak it and balance it depending upon data, that really is going to help you a lot in your game and in game success. And I agree with him. If eventually everything can happen on digital distribution, where very high-end, rich experience can be delivered over the CDNs, yes, that's the ideal. But right now, a combination of client and server is what is required, and what I strongly advocate for any developers to really look at. The challenge is the most of the developers may not understand the server-side infrastructure requirements, server-side programming, server-side management, and that's where a publisher like Brian can really come and help them to really take care of those things. But from a consumer point of view, the experience is much, much more enhanced if you're looking at a combination of client and server.
I brought up hype mark because I thought the question was whether cloud, cloud gaming is here to stay. I don't know about cloud gaming, but we definitely use cloud platform to serve our games.
I think the intent was cloud gaming specifically. So basically doing all the processing on the server side and just streaming down a result like Gaikai does. That was the intent of this particular one. And I think that, Andrew, you hit it on the head, right? It's still very expensive to do. Although services like Big Fish Unlimited do see the flip side of that, which is, if the device that you're playing on is really just a dumb client, then it doesn't matter what the device is. Right, and so it does potentially enhance the distribution, or it decreases the effort associated with doing cross-platform, possibly, right?
Yeah, cloud processing, cloud storage, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. But doing like rendering on the cloud is very expensive. Yeah.
Although, I mean, there are certain kinds of games, right? So if you look at something like Candy Crush and you sort of are envious of the success that they've seen by creating an integrated cross-platform experience, and you start sort of breaking down what kinds of games are possible within the context of the way that the technological solve that King.com has applied to that problem.
Yes.
You see you see a lot of the genres of games just can't apply that without something like a cloud gaming solution. So, what companies, is it NVIDIA that's doing Grid, that they're basically trying to? Yeah, I think there's a couple of companies, I think it's NVIDIA and Asus, that are both like really hardcore trying to provide cloud gaming solutions that are powerful and cheap. So we'll see if they're able to actually pull that off in order to enable these cross-platform experiences for genres that can't necessarily do it on their own. I'm going to skip this one because I think that we'd all agree that Candy Crush is crushing it, and this is important. Let's talk about social casino for a minute. So there's about 1,100 slot games on Facebook right now. More keep coming all the time. It seems like there's a new success story every day. There may be 50 failures every day. I'm not sure. What do you guys think about social casino as a driving force in gaming in games over the next year? There you go. So everybody should start making slot games?
Absolutely.
How about light consoles? We've got the Game Stick. We've got the Ouya. There was a new one I just read about yesterday. These little devices that plug into your TV and almost but not quite eliminate the need for an Xbox. Based on Android. Are these a real opportunity or is this just a passing fad? Ooh. Tell me why you think this is a real opportunity.
I think it's innovation. I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
The more we got out there, the more the people are using new devices, the more we can come up with new, cool ways of having games on our TV or wherever else. So I'm all for it.
What do you think the problem with this is, Brian?
It's the innovation. I agree with that. But from business perspective, from a developer perspective, you have to develop a new SKU to support that device, and you're not sure how many devices will be sold, and you're not just sure how much money you're making.
So it's just one more platform to
Right.
support, and if there's not really an audience there, it's not interesting.
True.
If it's between like porting for Ouya or porting for Xbox
Mhm.
and figuring out the control scheme, like you go Xbox every time, right? It's like enormous installed base of paying users, whereas the other one is kind of like build it and hopefully they'll come, right? So I think it's a really hard proposition. It's really expensive to build a platform.
Well, certainly Trip Hawkins would agree with that.
Yeah.
What about invisible consoles? This whole idea that you connect your phone to the TV and you eliminate the need for a console entirely. I know you like this idea. What about the rest of you? Is this real? Is this hype? Let's give it a 2-year event horizon.
2 years.
2 years. Not in the next 2 years? Manish, you're a fan of this. Tell us why.
I think I don't know about 2 years or 3 years, honestly, because it's the function of the technology, making it simple for the users to do it. And since I'm not the one who's inventing it and who's the kind of working on it, so I do not know a time frame. I think your question kind of, if it was not without a time frame of 2 years, the answer could be different. Yeah. It is bound to happen. The experience is much better. Experience has to be easier. How is it implemented? The last mile execution, that all this will depend upon. If you kind of screw it up by doing very complex or making it expensive or making it some more devices to be bought in home, then it's not going to work. If it is going to be conjunction of existing devices and such very easy, like an Apple Air TV, Air application, which allows you to stream over TV, now allows you to do something. Some gaming happening on TV, if that's simple, consumers are going to love it. So there are many ifs and buts on it to be a definitive answer on this particular. As a concept, I am a fan of it.
So, Jeremy, you were pretty confident on 2-year event horizon for this experience. Do you know something that we don't?
I can't make any comments on anything that's speculative or maybe rumored. No, I think that Manish has it's that 2 year. I mean, you phrased it such that it's like maybe.
I did that on purpose.
I know.
Definitely going to happen, but maybe not in the next 2 years.
Well, I think the biggest problem of this motion control or the invisible control we are facing is the TV remote, right? Remote control is here to stay, right? So people they are not going to play games with remote control. I mean, there are some applications who supports that, right? TV is sitting in the living room free to watch, right now. And remote control, you just hold your hand and change channels and change the volumes. I think once the remote control is gone, the other business model or other business opportunity will arise.
So I actually am a huge fan of this. I worked with a company in Israel last year that has a fully HTML5 version of this, so that as soon as TVs deploy HTML5 capable browsers, they'll be everywhere. And I also went to GDC and took a look at Wii U for the first time, like in a real way. And I feel like Nintendo's really got a handle on the types of experiences that this kind of ecosystem could provide. And even though the Wii U obviously hasn't been an outstanding success, I think that they've done a really good job of sort of paving the way for some really fun stuff that you can do when this experience exists. We are running really short on time, so let me flip through. I'd like to talk about this one. What do you guys think of real money gambling in games? Is it going to be a driving force for revenue for games?
What time frame?
Well, I don't get to do a time frame now because everybody already voted. So you all think that real money gambling, it's happening for games. Are you talking about casino style games, like, or are you talking about real money gambling in more traditional video game genres?
I think both. There's a lot of good companies that are innovating, like Bettables kind of pushing on that. Plumby, other companies like that. Like the demand is there, but the regulatory infrastructure blocks a lot of it, and it's not a global market. It's just like Germany happens to have a federal law around it, so that kind of works, but it's not a European like edict that you can solve for. It's U.S. is like statewide, so you're talking about like we're going to do a gambling business in California, New York, Vegas, like. So it ends up being very operationally complex to manage, and I think there'll be specialists that provide that service, and I think it'll apply to core games and non-core games. But it feels like unless there are some really big changes in the way that the regulatory environment works, it's still a couple years off.
Do you, Brian, or do you or Manish have a more Asian view on a less American view on real money gambling and games, and tell us what you feel like that from a cultural perspective fits within the context of your business?
From the demand and latent demand point of view, huge demand. People love to bet, and especially I can talk about India, they love to bet for as in name things as is it going to rain today? Yeah. So the basic culture towards betting and all that stuff is there. It's a regulatory framework which stops you from doing it, and that I don't see getting solved in India. The markets, whichever market regulatory framework can get solved, this is a huge opportunity.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to stop it here because we're out of time. I want to thank all of you for your opinions and for participating in this panel. You can all clap now.